So what are we going to talk about?
I can do that better. So what are we going to talk about? Bring it, Hillbilly.
What are we going to talk about?
Competition. This is a big topic. Our political lives are run by it. Our entertainment is consumed by it. Competition is a juggernaut of commercial and emotional and even spiritual control of our lives.
I gotta know that I'm better than you.
Yeah, to the personal level, there's the comparison, the personal comparison. I feel like it behooves us to discuss competition because I actually compete regularly and you don't,
Nope.
and yet,
I have, but
Right.
I don't. No.
and yet you would say out of the two of us, you're the more competitive.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's probably why I don't compete. Like I admire your approach to competition. You're so laid back. You're like, whatever I do is what I do. But like for me, whether it's a jiu-jitsu tournament or weightlifting, the period prior is pure agony.
Mm-hmm.
Once I get on the platform, once I get on the mat, I'm fine. But like I'm losing gallons of sweat through my palms. I'm just like my stomach is all just like
Why?
in that spot.
Like, why does that happen? Because you're not unique in that. But why is that a thing?
You're laying it on the line, right? You're
But laying what on the line? That's my big question.
well, whether you're good enough. I think it has this fundamental question of like, how do I measure up? And this fear that you're not going to be good enough. It robs the fun. Like I love to train.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I love the activities themselves. Like all that stuff I love to do. But if I'm going to have to go through so much, I don't know, anxiety, is that what it is? Whatever it is that I go through prior to competition, like that's not fun.
And that anxiety, as we were discussing, is based on the fact that you might not win. There's a self-worth involvement there.
It's a total self-worth involvement there. And as much as I can tell myself that I don't care, it's not so much that I personally am worried about, how I look, it's how I represent. That I let my school down.
Yeah, I let my
friends down.
And that's drilled into us early too, that our self-worth is wrapped up in this external process of having to compete for, if not ourselves, somebody else. It's one of the biggest cultural benchmarks of your self-worth. In other words, we are defined in many ways by how well we do competitively. Whether it's having the biggest house, whether it's having the most money, whether it's being the best at sport, our culture doesn't ask us to look within as much as it does compare ourselves. It forces us to compare ourselves to each other. And so we are naturally a competitive society. I can't speak for anybody else really, but in terms of America, we are by nature winners. Well, we want to be, and we strive to be somehow. And when we're not winning, we feel like crap about ourselves. And that's sort of a big thing, proving ourselves. We don't really have, I talked about this with Dan John on a previous video, and you and I have chatted about it. We don't have rites of passage in our culture like we did historically. We're not, I'm listening to Dan What's-His-Name's podcast about the hardcore history.
Oh, yeah.
And you hear about war after war after war and how that's such a integral part of people's culture. And so for men, for many years, that was the rite of passage, is to go off to war, which, thank God, that's not so much in our culture right now. But we still seem to crave that. We still seem to need that sort of thing that tells us that we're men or something. We have to prove ourselves.
Maybe we carry the ancestral memory of competition at that level of stakes, whether it was gladiatorial games or even the ancient Greeks. Their boxing brutal. They wore horns.
Yeah, they sat down and beat the crap out of each other.
Scoring was a possible outcome,
yeah.
right? Boxing up till the end of the 19th century like bouts could go for hours.
Yeah.
And they ain't got gloves.
No.
This bare knuckle bullshit. You know?
I mean, there's that violent aspect, but then there's so many other ways we compete as well. And we're talking specifically from our gender. Then there's an entire other concept of competition that transcends genders. I mean, there's all sorts of emotional and financial and other things that sometimes doesn't even attach itself to any particular gender.
Well, I mean, we're the champion swimmers, right? We're also the champions of like, I won the race against the tiger.
Yeah.
Or if I didn't run the race against the tiger, I ran the race against you.
Yeah.
We're the product of generations upon generations
Of success.
And so, but we don't have a lifestyle that demands that anymore.
So we've created it.
So thoroughly comfortable.
Yeah.
Yes, we've created it.
Created a bunch of them.
We've created it for an elite minority.
Yeah.
And for everybody else.
You either have to be genetically gifted, financially gifted, or some other way of being gifted.
Yeah, and for everybody else, it's by proxy.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I live in the state with probably the most famous football rivalry. You know, I mean,
Go Crimson.
Crimson Tide,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So it's Alabama and Auburn. But I can remember even as a kid navigating relationships based on one of the initial questions that you were asked. You know, who are you for? Alabama or Auburn? And that, you know, defined your tribe.
Yeah.
I had to turn in my man card years ago because I don't care. Right? I just don't. It's not something that has ever interested me.
What creates that fandom?
Not participating. Most of my jiu-jitsu brothers watch the fights. They're interested in MMA, but they're not rabid fans like you'll find on the internet. Right? I mean, no offense to those of you who are fans, because I know that that's something that people get a lot of enjoyment out of. But from my perspective, I think the people who are the most rabid fans are the ones who are actually furthest away from actually engaging in the sport itself.
I saw that in the Conor McGregor hype over the
Right.
last 5 or 6 years. A lot of the craziness for him and his antics had to do with people that didn't fight.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder what that distance creates. Is that sort of like rooting for your gladiator? I mean,
Yeah.
you're fighting without having to fight.
It's by proxy, right? That's my guy, and if he wins, it reflects positively on me.
And you can do that,
I won.
right? You can do that with a
Right.
team. You can do that with any sort of competition. One of the things I know that we've talked about in the past, and that I've blabbled on about in my books and in my videos, is the concept of hylomorphism.
That's a big word right there.
Big word.
So hylomorphism is this belief that human beings are made of both matter, hyle, and then there's a structure to matter given by mind or soul. A hylomorphist would be somebody who does not think that we're like minds inside of bodies, right? But actually what it means to be a human being is to be, and I'm going to push two words together and try to make it one word in English. We are mind bodies, or we're soul bodies, thinking of one integral unit there, bringing together, say, a physical pole on the one hand and a mental pole on the other, but it's one fundamental reality. So Aristotle was an ancient Greek hylomorphist, and this 20th century philosopher named Paul Weiss tried to use a lot of Aristotle's ideas to help us better understand what sport is, and also to indicate to us what sport could be. It should be something that fosters hylomorphism in the best sense of the term, that you would engage in athletics not as a purely physical pursuit, but as an activity that is integrally connected with your mental and spiritual life as well.
The book, I'm famous for forgetting the title of this book, Ancient Greek Athletics, and I'm going to just put up a little thing of the book right here. Daniel Dombrowski wrote it. I got to interview him many years ago, and and talk to them about this book.
If you subscribe to Greek hylomorphism, this belief that there's a close or integral connection between mind and body, then health or lack thereof would involve, both mind and body. The root to the word health has to do with wholeness. So there's some sort of connection between health and wholeness. So what it means to be sick is to, in some way or another, have parts break down, separate themselves from the whole.
Ancient athletics and Greek idea. It's here it is. And in one of my videos that I made many years ago, I talk about his three concepts of play. Play to the Greeks was based on three things. It was frolic, competition, and war. War and competition were not the same thing, and yet in modern times, we come at competition very warlike. It's dominate, it's take over, it's destroy the other person.
Win at all costs.
Win at all costs. And we get drilled that into our systems starting as kids. And I ask this whenever I teach a workshop, and I say, can you remember the time in your youth when you stopped asking your friends to come out and play? Yeah. I remember specifically, I was about 12 years old, and I'm like, well, that's childish. We don't do that. We don't ask our friends to come out and play. But you're left with very few options at that point, because movement should be playful, movement should be childlike, and strength and the pursuit of strength is kind of ridiculously childish anyway. It's kind of fun and goofy. But we're told, especially in high school, we get into high school and we're told you have two choices of how to move. You either don't, or you play sports, competitive sports. And competitive sports in high school is not the Greek ideal of competition. It is war. It is win at all costs.
Again, because, I don't know if it's because, but there's certainly an element of this that affects it, is that you have all these peripherals to that sport that aren't actually engaged in the sport, right? That are invested, sometimes financially, particularly around here, and I know it's big in Texas too. High school and college athletics are major revenue generators for these schools.
You drive through rural Texas, which I've done many times over the last 6 months, and you drive through these little tiny towns that closed businesses left and right down the main strip, ramshackle places that are falling apart, but then you pass the high school. You can't tell it's a high school immediately because all you see is a stadium. Not the kind of stadium that I grew up in. Even my high school had a pretty nice stadium. I was lucky, but this is like a stadium. You see that over and over again. You drive down these rural roads, like Highway 70 something or whatever, and you come across this little town, population 6,000, stadium. And you see these all the time. So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of money there.
There are high schools around here that have better athletic facilities than colleges that I've been to. So there's the money element that is generating revenue for the school.
Familial
There's
elements.
the familial element. There is, and again, you've got parents who are living vicariously through their kids.
Oh, there's a whole concept of pride that we could talk about. That's a deep dive that we can avoid right now. But
okay, so we'll avoid the more parental pride of it, but then there's the also of like little Timmy's got skills.
Yeah.
Little Timmy's gonna get a scholarship.
Yeah, little Timmy's gonna make money for the family.
So now we're investing in little Timmy, who's 8 years old, right? Who starts playing his respective sport year round.
Yeah.
He plays team league. He plays club league. Your weekends are now gone because you're spending every weekend taking your kid to go play this particular sport, so that he starts at, sometimes as early as 4 or 5 years old, right? And starts playing and so by the time that he's 20, he's got 15, 16 years of playing almost year round, right? No off season.
So that sounds like you're building a warrior.
Except what you end up with is a broken athlete by the time they're 20-something years
It's
old.
a veteran soldier who might have to retire soon.
Right?
Yeah. So we should talk about a little bit about the Greek ideal of competition, which is you bring two people or two teams. You have team A and team B, or person A and person B. You bring them together, and their goal is actually to make each other better. Not to conquer or dominate. If you conquer the other person, if you dominate over that other person, you didn't teach the correct lessons. They didn't learn the correct lessons. I mean, we want to think it is. Every movie that we see is about that. You get stomped and then you come back. Rocky's about that, et cetera, et cetera. That's not actually how a tribe works. So the competition within a tribe, the Greek ideal of competition was 2 teams or people go in. Their goal is to bring as best they can themselves, the best version of themselves, so the other person has the right opponent to get better. Whether you win or lose, you come away with lessons. And so losing was not a failure.
The word competition itself, it's derived from some Latin roots. And what it literally means is like struggling with or asking with your opponent, which of the 2 of us is better at this activity. But it's the with part that I find interesting. The competition can be a cooperative affair where you're in effect asking your opponent, to engage in this activity to see who's the better at it.
That is how, in its best form, how jiu-jitsu is trained.
Right, martial arts in general, but yeah, jiu-jitsu is
and
particular.
the beauty of jiu-jitsu is that it allows you to train at a level of intensity that even brings that to the fore more, right? But
like both of you can turn up the knobs when you need to.
Yeah, you can turn up the tempo or you can turn up the intensity and get to a place where you're both testing your skills. But the whole point of it is so that you both mutually get better.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, if you're that guy who's going to go into your class and it's your job or your goal to smash and be, and win every single time and just dominate, you're going to get kicked out of that school pretty soon. That's not, it's not conducive to what's being done.
Exactly. And if you think about that big picture, if you're the person who has to win, what happens when you don't? There can only be one number 1. And if we're all striving, if we have this pyramid of people or teams striving to be that number 1, what's the ultimate lesson?
So that's the interesting thing. Bruce Lee actually has a quote that basically runs the line, no matter how big and bad you are, there's always somebody who's bigger and badder.
Yeah.
And you can watch through the MMA world, right? And we're just seeing this right now with Conor, right? Is that, and it happens successively every 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
A fighter will work himself up to the pinnacle of his craft and will be the dominating athlete in the MMA sport. And then as soon as he peaks, he literally peaks and can't maintain it and starts losing.
And I talk about this a little bit in my book, the concept of peak culture, and how we're always about peaking. We always want to peak for a competition or peak.
The problem with the peak is the other side is downhill.
Yeah, and in our culture, we're taught that we peak in our 20s.
Yeah.
So we've got 60 plus years of decline according to that schedule. Nothing else in nature peaks like that. If we took a lesson from nature, we'd instead of finding one big peak and a horrible decline, maybe we'd do a lot of little peaks. And maybe we'd peak in multiple things. Or maybe we never quite peak. It's okay to plateau. If you're doing really good, it's okay to be here. A concept I love is not necessarily being the best, but being your best. And understanding the difference. Because I know a lot of people who might be considered the best probably aren't their best. The whole goal of peaking or being number 1 has actually ruined them and their place within the tribe in many ways. The big lesson of being your best instead of the best is just a struggle to get across, to teach. One insight I had later in my life, and it could be a cop-out. It could be a cop-out just because I'm not good at anything. But I don't feel these days, and I haven't for a while, like I have anything to prove. And I'm part of a lot of Facebook groups and internet groups where with competitors talking about the competition. And they can be sometimes real dicks to each other because they're even competing about how much they know. There's a strongman group where sometimes there's a handful of these little strongman guys on there that are just kind of dicks. They're more condescending than they are supporting. And I'm sure there's that in every single sport. I think those guys are ultimately looking to prove something. I grew up feeling like I had to prove stuff. I was a skinny little kid. I got picked on a lot. I sucked at every sport I played. I wasn't particularly good at anything. But then somewhere along the lines, I stopped caring and just started exploring. And I think once I had some fun with it, I've seen you go through this with jiu-jitsu too.
Yeah.
You know, once you have fun with it, you stop caring that you're trying to dominate or conquer or destroy or anything like that. And when you have less to prove, your journey becomes a lot more enjoyable.
I totally agree with that. And I think that when you are no longer obsessed with proving yourself and that the primary goal is to be good at whatever it is that you're doing, then you actually free yourself up to learn whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the desire to be good at something can actually get in the way of being good at it.
Yeah. This is the tricky part of being a trainer who is trying to share the exploration of movement with people. You know, movement and training for movement and being strong and having capability and building skill, even if you're not the best at those skills, is truly empowering in that it offers you so many roads and so many possibilities. And I've just always been wanting to share that. Like, there's a great big world out there. Why are we stuck in the gym, always trying to do in the gym stuff? The in the gym stuff should be making us better, giving us the baseline of skill to then just go try to do stuff. In sharing that with people and trying to share that with people, it's really hard when you're constantly met with that idea of either having to be really good at something, having to prove yourself, having to compete.
What I feel like you're speaking to is when gymming itself becomes a competition, and beyond more than just, you know, the CrossFit model of workout as competition, but actually as gym owner, right? I mean, you're competing with your economy. You're competing with the other gym down the street.
Even within a gym, trainers have to compete sometimes for clientele.
So the gym industry itself is actually very unique in that you are clustered with your competitors in a very close, intimate way. There's all these unspoken rules about how you even talk to another trainer's client.
There's an irony hat here. On one hand, I'm glad I don't own a gym anymore. On the other hand, I really, really miss my tribe. Big time. I still keep in touch with them all the time. And the other irony is that we are sitting in your brand new gym.
Soon to be.
It is now a beautiful empty shell, and we just sit here and look around and go, ooh, all this stuff that's going to happen here. But you did it. You said, you know what, I'm going to sort of step away from the culture and create your own tribe.
God, I've always been kind of an outlier in that regard.
That's why we met and got along. So this is the beginning of a new tribal step for Dave, and so it's exciting to be here talking about this in his new space. It's interesting that means to an end will suffer for the reward. That, you know, I mentioned this a lot in my last book, how the whole concept of our society is based on suffering and reward. And so the greater the suffering, the greater the reward. And in competition, that's huge. But we take that into our day-to-day lives. In fact, I just read a post today of a friend of mine, and I've joked about this in past videos and in workshops. And so it's funny that it just happened again. And it's that person who says how much they hate running, but they got to go do it.
Yeah, or I was just thinking about, I've seen quotes from Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali talked about how he hated every second of training, right? But he sucked it up because that's what made him a champion. Like, you're willing to invest that much of really? I've even heard Jack LaLanne talk about not enjoying training, but that it was, you know, worth it in the end.
Right.
And I'm just like, that's so, to me, that is so sad.
Well, that's a big part of the problem that our culture has with movement, is that we believe all movement has to be towards, it has to be that suffering because it has to have a reward. It in itself is not the reward. And the fitness culture drills this into us, our sports culture drills this into us, and our competitive culture drills us into it. We have to suffer now for the reward later. And so that's how we treat our workouts. This isn't to build a foundation to then go find joy. This is the suffering we must endure for some kind of reward down the road.
I like moving. Moving's my favorite.
Yeah, moving's great. And I just kind of want to train to be able to move better.
Right?
Because if I can move better, there's so many things out there I can go try to do. And that's awesome. But
And you know, if you enjoy movement for movement's sake, then moving better means that you get more movement, therefore more joy. I mean,
it feeds
itself.
itself.
It feeds itself.
The serpent eating its own happy tail. Because how many times has a gym member or client come to you and says, I came in here feeling awful and I'm leaving feeling better.
Yeah.
I like the leaving feeling better. Try feeling better in the moment. When I'm in the middle of a squat or something, as an example, some heavy squat, something that is a struggle, could be suffering, could be viewed as suffering. I like to celebrate. I'll put a smile on my face and think, look at what I can do in this moment. Yeah, it's uncomfortable as heck, but I'm doing it. And I can find joy in that movement, in that moment of that movement, kind of like we would when we learn anything. Like when we get new information and we embody new information, that's a joyful experience. Or at least it should be. And I think learning movement should be the same way.
There is a danger that athletic training would degenerate into something where human beings are like machines, engaging in repetitive activities without any sort of cognitive activity involved. So this is where hylomorphism is important again, that athletic training should involve the whole person. There's no way to become a good free throw shooter except by getting at the free throw line and shooting dozens of free throws. But somehow or another this has to be animated with a spirit of joy in the activity. And one of the functions of a coach is to be something like somebody who just not only draws the X's and O's on the board that help the athlete understand the plays or the moves, but should be somebody like a moral leader as well, to have the training animated with something bigger than just repetition of exercises.
Competition can be the same exact way. Being present and finding joy in competition, I love it. I'll tell you the story. The first time I discovered this, I was in a Taekwondo competition. And I was fighting this guy from my school. There was multiple schools involved, but there was one guy from my school, and I was fighting him. He was a higher belt. He was a black belt. I wasn't quite a black belt. And he had the smile on his face. And I'm from the American school of thought, where you go in all serious and frankly, well, that can be a scary side of me, and I still delve into that when I compete sometimes. Like when I do Moss wrestling. I go to my scary place. This guy helped me a little bit get out of that, though. We got on the mat, we're about to go, the arm's up, he's about to go, the ref's about to call it, and this guy has a big old goofy smile on his face. And the entire time, go, and we're fighting. He's practically laughing. There's two options there. On one hand, I could get pissed, and I saw a lot of his opponents get pissed. A lot of people from the other schools were like, I don't know what to do with this.
Right.
This guy can't possibly be having fun. And they would lose their shit, and he would defeat them. So I knew I was going to get my ass kicked anyway. He was a better fighter. But I just started laughing. And the two of us are laughing, fighting our asses off, but laughing through the whole thing. And that moment, that bout changed my whole concept of competition. And from that day on, I knew, oh my God, I can have fun doing this.
Oh, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
Doing Kali Filipino stick stuff. I mean, you're swinging rattan sticks at each other. And like misses happen, and that usually means you get wrapped on the knuckles or something like that, and it hurts. It hurts bad. It's not, you're not swinging with full force. You're not trying to smack the hell out of somebody, but occasionally it happens. I'm doing a drill that is right on the edge of my ability, right? And so I'm like up and everything is alive and trying to keep pace and stay up, and I'm laughing. I'm having so much fun. There's so much joy in being in that edge and in that place.
That's a relationship with your body that's exciting.
Yeah.
Look at what you can do.
Yeah.
Even if you can't fully do it, you're trying.
Yeah.
And why can't we smile through that?
This is competition. This is not war, right? You're not going to die. The whole thing is set up. The whole thing is set up to maximize your safety.
Yeah.
Right? So if you can't relax into that and have fun with it,
if you
maybe
can't
you shouldn't be doing it.
glean the proper lessons from it, the Greek athletic ideal was you bring your best game to their best game. And that way you're offering them your best. You're not just trying to defeat them. You're offering them the best lesson you can possibly offer them. And so that way, I'm not trying to destroy you, I'm trying to teach you. And I'm going to take what you have to teach. And that can't help but make you and myself better, and therefore our tribe better.
I think the martial arts offer a unique perspective on that because, on one hand, we're supposed to be fighting, right? But the truth of the matter is that like we've established from the get-go that there's a rule set here. Okay, so if there's a rule set, we're not fighting, right?
We're
playing a game.
Yes.
Right? If I can't gouge your eyes out, right? If I can't do all the dirty tricks, right, that a real fight would entail, right? We're playing a game. So relax.
Yeah.
We're playing a game.
And if we can apply that to even non-martial sports, then that's a huge thing.
All the more so, right? Like you're playing a game with gravity.
I get to play with big logs and giant balls. I get to carry things and pick things up and put things over my head. How childish is that?
You pick them up just so that you can put them down.
Yeah. It's kind of ridiculous. And if we can step back and look at a lot of sports, it's kind of ridiculous.
It's utterly ridiculous. Think about how much work and how much physical work is performed to achieve nothing.
Yeah, nothing's accomplished ultimately.
But doing the work itself.
So maybe the
That is the definition of play.
Yeah. So maybe the actual accomplishment is what lessons are you learning from this?
Which is, again, the definition of play. Play exists within the human species, within all species, as a learning experience. Right? Our dogs, when they play, right, they're learning.
Yeah. Big time.
There's an exchange going on.
Hopefully I'll have a video I can throw in of that right here. My new girl Ko'olau is learning so much from one of his dogs, Benson. Benson's teaching her how to play. And every time they meet, every time I come back here, she has a new thing that she's learning from him. And they have a new level to their play. It's amazing. Did you ever invent a sport as a kid?
All the time.
They were far more elaborate and more complicated than anything that's being played professionally right now.
Are you kidding? Right? There's the complexity of rules.
Yeah. And it was crazy because sometimes you had to change the rules because there's only 2 people or 3 people or 4 people.
Like how do we modify the game?
Yeah.
And still, because the whole point was not baseball.
And it wasn't to win.
It was to play.
It was to play.
It was to play.
And so you come up with these crazy things, and it makes me look at the games that are being played professionally now and think, if you think of it through those lenses, these are very simple children's games, but they're children's games.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being a child in your movement and in your strength and in your attempts and your abilities, because children move without judgment. It's an awesome thing. I'm always teaching people, hopefully, move like children do. Stop getting your children to work out like adults. I'm sick and tired of that.
Yeah.
Start looking at your child, seeing what they do, and try to do that. But anyway, if we can look at these sports as children's games, we can actually maybe appreciate them even more instead of seeing them as warlike, conquering activities, gladiatorial games.
Man, that's deep.
As deep,
That's deep.
deep as that pit you're dug right over there.
I've worked with various athletes over the years, and I always prefer to work with basically what you would call your B team players, because they're hungry. They're hungry and they want to get better. Occasionally you will find somebody who is of that A-team caliber who's so dedicated to their craft and their sport that they're still trying, they see that there's always room to improvement.
It's an art and passion to them,
Yeah.
not just a paycheck or a win.
But that's a rarity. More than likely you're going to find somebody who has received that level of success and taken it to mean amazing.
I've known so many high-level athletes like this that see a squat and they're able to squat. They see an Olympic lift and they're able to Olympic lift. You see a lot of high-level athletes that mimicked their way to get there rather than embodied the movements. And so when you have this athlete who gets to the top because they're really good at mimicking, they're just such a natural athlete that they can mimic stuff, they've never actually understood movement. They don't have an actual relationship with their body. As in terms of a trainer, in terms of somebody who's a movement educator, who likes to teach movement and teach people how to be movers, to go and then express their life through movement, it's much easier to work with somebody who's willing to embody the movement rather than somebody who just naturally picks up movement, because they can monkey see, monkey do it. Talk about A versus B team. Oftentimes the B team people have to properly learn movement.
Yeah.
I was the B team. I'm still the B team person.
Right.
I have to spend my whole life properly learning the movement for me and my body and my relationship with my body. And that's going to make a different competitor. And that's probably going to make somebody who understands how that kind of competition is not warlike, but it might actually have benefit to everyone, whether you win or lose.